and welcome to Copán, a series of lunchtime conversations hosted by myself, Maeve Stone, for the Green Arts Department at Access Ballymun.
Aoibheann.
Hi Gerry, how are you?
I'm brilliant. How are you?
Good. I'm excited to be here. I feel a little bit underqualified for this conversation, but
we all do, I think. Yeah. And no, it's great. I really appreciate Maeve's initiative in bringing us together.
yeah, it's I'm up in Bangor at the moment in County Down, and it's a beautiful day. So I don't know what it's like where you are.
It's been pretty good so far here, anyway. Yeah.
It feels right to talk about the climate.
yeah.
First and foremost.
But there is a yellow warning, I think, for the week ahead for floods.
Okay.
From Net and especially down the west of Ireland.
I think we've had half an hour to talk, so I guess we should follow the rules.
Yes,
in some shape or form.
The half hour will go very quickly, I think.
Yeah. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Aoibheann McCann. So I'm professionally I'm an actor, voiceover, whatever you want, basically in that realm. And then in the meantime, I'm working with Maeve Stone, our lovely Maeve, and Leave O'Donoghue on a new company called Aoibheann, which is focusing on sustainable film and TV. And I could go on about that for a long time, but we don't have very much time. And in the meantime, I also try to work on projects that are sustainable, and I've somehow found myself become a slow fashion advocate in the last few years through work and press and things, which has started some really interesting conversations. So it's a genuine interest of mine. It probably has been my whole life, but it's taken off in the last few years.
Did I see you down in Kilkenny in the Tempest? Is that what that?
I think you might have seen me in A Midsummer Night's Dream.
Midsummer.
Yeah, I mean the Tempest was on, but I wasn't in.
It was a temp. Yeah, it was a Tempest I saw actually. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you didn't see me, but you might have seen
some actors.
A dark-haired Irish Colleen running around the place.
Okay.
Lynn does love a couple of actors running around the castle. It's great crack down there.
It was nice, yeah. Anyway, so for myself then, I'm a physicist. My qualifications are in experimental physics. And having had a quick look at the essay that we're talking about now, which is A Deep History of Carbon Dioxide by Peter Brannan, I thought I'd just outline a few of my experiences that would be related to that kind of general subject, and kind of what I do and how I began thinking about the climate emergency in the context of what we'll be talking about in the essay. Mm-hmm. So for myself, then I'm just going to pick out three kind of activities I've done that are related to what I do and how I became involved in the climate emergency. And this goes back to well, just before I do that, I'd add also that all through my life, I really loved working with people in the arts.
Oh, good.
As a scientist, and there are a number of people in the arts who love working with scientists. So
I really think that there's particularly recently, I've found so many bridges between the two worlds. In fact, they don't feel like two different worlds, particularly when it comes to the activism side and the mobilizing. There's a huge amount of interest from, I was going to say your community, but the science community to work with artists. Well, maybe there always has been, like you say, but I'm only feeling it now, which is really, really brilliant. It feels very positive. Yeah,
well, no, for me, I've been in friends of artists since my childhood. So I'm going to maybe just before getting into talking about the essay itself, give to illustrate what I do and how I got into this, give you three examples of activities I've done. So the first would be in 1981. I organized the first Irish Arctic expedition with a sculptor called Danny Osborne, and the three of us went to the Canadian High Arctic for 5 months, about 1,000 miles inside the Arctic Circle. And I was looking at the solar energy coming in to the Arctic region, the effect of the snow or the dark, or when the snow is not there, on the reflected light and the absorbed heat from the sun. And Danny was looking at the Earth's processes and doing some paintings of the Earth's process. And John made a 50-minute documentary film with RTE. That was the first, and that's very relevant now because the Arctic, as you know, is heating up faster than anywhere else, and is one of the potential tipping points where the methane coming from the permafrost increases, and already the ice cover is decreasing, so we get more and more heat absorbed. So it's all, the whole process is accelerating over time. So that was my first kind of serious work in that area. The next, I suppose, if you go ahead then, and it relates very much to the essay, which is about half the essay is about volcanoes. And Danny and I have been planning for about 20 years after the Arctic trip to go to a volcano, and he was interested in casting some sculptures from the lava as it flows out from the crater of the volcano. So we eventually managed to get to Hawaii in 2012 with about 4 other artists, and we cast some sculptures in lava from Hawaii. We were about a month on the volcano, and they were exhibited, in fact, in the RHA exhibition this year, the summer annual exhibition. And the third trip then was in 2000. So that was 2012. In 2007, I went with my partner and my 7-year-old daughter to the country of Tuvalu, which is a tiny coral atoll nation in the South Pacific, and we lived there for a month with the people. And there we were looking at. I hooked up with the agricultural officer and looking at ways of using agriculture to try and maintain the integrity of the coral reefs as the oceans rise, how to maintain the health of the coral. So those are the 3 experiences I've had that are directly related, I think, to the discussion we're having today. And that would lead very nicely into the discussion of the essay by Peter Brannan.
I mean, when I said at the top of this conversation, I feel a bit underqualified. I just feel very privileged now to have your mind to ask you questions about this, because I read it twice and I thought to myself, what struck me the most emotionally, and I guess I've read about the Permian period, but never thought about it. Of course, I've thought about it in that way a little, but it made me wonder about what would happen to this planet that we call home. And obviously Peter covered the idea that it may not happen in the way it happened before, but I guess I'm asking, do you think we're ultimately doing that again?
Well, potentially, I would say. I'm just pulling out his paper here now to look at it. I think he lists a couple of mass extinctions in the past, and that's his area of expertise.
Yeah.
And a lot of them came from volcanic activity. But now we're getting a similar pattern, but it's within human control, as it were. And in a way, I think there are 2 positive messages in his essay. One is the fact that we do have control about it, and that we can slow down the process into manageable forms. And the second, I would take that he didn't say explicitly, is that in all these disasters over the hundreds of millions of years, the Earth itself has recovered. The species have been extinct, but the Earth itself, the planet Earth, has managed to mend itself.
Yeah.
So the question is then not about whether the Earth will survive what we're doing to it at the moment, but whether we will, or how well we will survive.
Yeah.
And because we have some control over it, even though the COP27 is looking not great, humans do respond when things get bad enough.
Yeah, and this is the thing, and I know that myself, just as a human being walking around, I understand that it takes a little while for me to engage with certain issues until it's almost too late. This subject matter has been on my mind since I was a little girl, and I've been asked before, actually quite a few times, why was that for me, maybe more than your average child or your average teenager. And I really don't know. I think I grew up in the Cooley Peninsula, in the hills. I had, unofficially, Ireland is a matriarchal society, and I think that the women in my mum's side of the family and my father's side of the family were quite adamant about looking after the land. I had a great aunt who she actually tied herself to a gate and stopped the testing for minerals on the mountain, because we understood that if they found them, then the mountain would be a completely different place. The whole area would be, and money was speaking quite loudly at the time. I was in Maynooth University in the Students' Union. I guess there's some there's activism in that consistently. You're constantly looking for better circumstances for students. Alongside this woman in her 80s, you know, trying to preserve the beauty is what she described, but also the livelihoods of people as well in the area. I'm sure some people would benefit greatly for if they did end up mining the Cooley Peninsula. But ultimately, I wonder why so many other people are not seeing. It's a big conversation for me constantly. Why don't people see the not the imminent, but the dangers of the way we live? I know it's systemic, and a huge amount of what we do is because we like to consume. We like to have things easily. We like to as a race. But yeah, it's sort of like the idea. I always wondered walking around, like, but the earth will be fine, but we may not be fine. So what are we doing this all for? And that has also been the philosophical question. And I know a few people working on the perception gap at the moment as to why the public are maybe not engaged with the subject in the way that you would, obviously, and your work is entrenched in it. And someone like me who's constantly asking and worrying and trying to find ways to communicate it and trying to find ways to make it, and this sounds so silly but fun, you know, almost like a way to the hope could be something we grow instead of something we have to lean on in the last minute. And what I mean is, that's a bit abstract, but what I mean is, you know, obviously hope is a big fuel to drive a huge amount of the activism that people are working on, or the projects that people are working on. But it's exhausting to maintain that level of enthusiasm and blue sky thinking when I'm imagining Peter Brannan's picture of the earth flattened, you know, with no life on it, and well, life on it, but life like our life just not possible anymore.
Yeah, I suppose not everybody finds it easy to think about these kind of existential questions, and the other main one would be, you know, nuclear war. And you know, in my youth, we were very exercised and active in that area, and you know, and still we have today, so many years later, we still have people expecting to nuclear weapons, you know. And it's equally got the potential to seriously, you know, damage human life on Earth. And people maybe just find it difficult to think about these existential questions. Maybe that's part of it. But something you said there that just resonates also with a lot of what Maeve has said in the past. She's talked a lot about the intergenerational aspects of climate change, which I find really interesting. And you talked about, you know, when you were a child with your grandmother, and you know, I was rolling back to when I was a student, you know. So I suppose another question would be then: is it something that the you know, the current generation of the, you know, students, is it something they're more interested in than the kind of the middle group of people, you know, the people who are in their 40s and 50s? Is it because the people in the 40s and 50s are working so hard they don't have time to do this, or they're in jobs where they can't be seen to be too active, you know, or whatever? Yeah,
it's an interesting topic because, you know, once you know, it's very hard to unknow, you know, when you understand what could happen. Speaking about making art, myself and another writer, Caris Kelly, last year, we worked with Drogheda Art Centre and we're trying to write a play called Legacy, which is about the Irish aunt, you know, like your auntie Mary or your auntie Rosaline or whatever, and the significance of these women in your life, and how they're almost like another parent for a lot of Irish families. Particularly, I'm one of 8 kids, so my aunt was really important to our family. And ultimately, we were writing this play, and it was about the future and about the next generation, what it means to be a mother or a father or a parent, or, you know, the DNA aspect of that, passing it along, or the traditions and all of those things. And we didn't genuinely, even both of us separately, are very active in the climate movement, the climate justice movement. It never really came into the play. But then on the last 2 days of the show, we were making this sort of presentation for an audience on the Friday, we couldn't avoid it. It was coming at us in every direction.
Yeah.
So it was called Legacy in the end. It wasn't called that initially. It was called, I think, The Unmarried Aunt or something. But it just kept coming, because when we started thinking about our potential children, because neither Karis nor I have children of our own, and thinking about the legacy of us as people, we ended up creating a climate action play, and it genuinely was not our intention. It became something that was it became really emotional, and we found footage, and we found recordings of letters from the famine in Ireland, and from, current day teachings about what it means to be alive, and it's just all COVID. And I got my nieces and nephews to record things, and it was very moving for me anyway, and I think for the audience, to realize that everything is connected to this legacy feeling. And I wonder if everyone is so tired, like you say, working hard, trying to maintain the status quo, which is a capitalist society where everyone has a job and buys a house and has a pension, and I think the next generation, weirdly, because a lot of that is not as accessible for my generation, and particularly the one after me, that maybe there's a sort of moment of, what is there for us if we can't have all of this material comfort and wealth? Then we're actually looking, and this sounds supposed to be a hopeful chat, but a lot of this, that the younger generation, I wonder if they're realizing that there's so much less to invest in personally now than there was. And maybe that's a blessing in an odd way, that there's a energy to fight even harder for just survival in general, never mind the legacy of the human race, but just to have a better life. And now we know in the last 8 years, the temperatures in Ireland have gone up. That we're looking at the warmest 8 years we've had. I heard that yesterday on the news. And I thought, oh, great, it's starting.
Yeah.
But I mean, I could go. I mean, I feel like I'm running away from the subject and back again, because it's such an emotional thing for me, and I think a lot of the generation.
No, that sounds fantastic, and it's interesting how the climate stuff just came in the last hour, as it were.
Yeah.
But the whole question of legacy, I think, is if you presumably you got the introduction by Greta Thunberg.
Yeah.
And she's very much about the legacy, I think. She's saying that my generation has left a pretty big mess and very little legacy to her generation.
Yeah. And actually, one of the things that stuck out for me was, like, what is it exactly we want to solve in the first place? That was one of the questions. And then I thought maybe you could help me answer that question more than most people. Like, what is it we are trying to solve? What do you think we are, or what are we all trying to do now, today in 2022? Because, we talk about mitigation, and we talk about preparation, and it's a big question to answer, but what do you think is
I suppose it's in general term, it's about lifestyle, that and then I've been thinking about this as well, just since I got this this essay, and thinking that, well, yes, I mean, my own lifestyle now is very different from my parents. I was thinking back, even as recently, well, for me, say in the 1980s, in schools, there was still the strap, and that was encouraged by the parents. I mean, that's horrendous these days to think that, if I say this to somebody who's 20, they say, really,
Yeah.
And your parents beat you as well, so the lifestyle change between, over one generation, it's significant. But then if you go back to the generation before that, they had the war, the two wars probably, or the one at least anyway, and their lifestyle was totally different. So one thing's for sure, I think, is that the next generation's lifestyle will be very different from the current generation, be it mine or be it the people who are 40. And I think that very often the people who are in the arts are kind of helping to define lifestyles, whether it's in fashion and clothes, or fashion in gadgets, or ways of living, or philosophies. A lot of ways of talking now is very different. So if I talk to a 20-year-old, I've got to watch my P's and Q's, because you may not be saying he or she, you might be saying they, or whatever. So their lifestyle, I think, is already very different from the present generation. So things will change and things will evolve. So in a way, that's hopeful. But getting back then to the question of climate change, then I think that that Greta Thunberg is quite right, that she's laying the blame at the feet of the world leaders now, be they political leaders or financial leaders, and that is where the action has to start. But meanwhile, the 20-year-olds, the current generation, they can get on with doing what they can within their sphere, so they can plant, a tomato in the back garden, and start feeling about how they want to get into a lifestyle that fits the world they're living in now, and the world they'll be living in the next 10 or 20 years. I don't know whether that answers your question a little bit. I
guess I'm wondering, like, if we don't have much time left, so I wonder, what do you think the first thing that we could do in the next 5 years that would be significant when it comes to making a real change for the better?
Well, I think that the first thing is that you reflect on your own life and what you do within your own world, and as part of that, I think that is probably the big answer, and that's at a personal level, but it's also at a household level. It's also at a national level. So you don't say, well, Ireland's contribution to the global emissions is only 0.1% or whatever it is, that's not a reason for not doing anything, because the world is changing and you have to change with the world. Also, I was reading a little bit about Tuvalu just last night to kind of get up to speed there. And, they are in danger of being submerged by the rising sea levels. But there are things they can do as well. So they can stop throwing the rubbish in the lagoon for a start. But that's polluting and killing all the coral, as well as the rising temperatures. So you can look at your own and look at your own contribution. And I think this is a general thing, that instead of blaming other people, you should think of it in terms of contributions and focus on your own contribution.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been in many, with a certain generation who these people are beloved to me. I've worked with them in art spaces, and I've said, they know, oh, Aoibheann, you won't like this because, it's plastic, or Aoibheann, you won't like this because it's brand new. And I'll go, I don't have a problem with it. It's just, it's not my choice, or perhaps I'll try a bit harder to find an alternative. But it always ends up in a conversation where one or two of them will say, what about China? And I have to go, yeah, but we're one unit as the earth. And I guess we can't ask anything. We can't ask of someone if we don't ask it of ourselves. I think Mary Robinson said that in the Gate Theatre. I chaired a panel that she was on with Professor Frank Convery, and Una Murphy was directing the show that we were responding to. It was a climate action piece, a beautiful piece of writing. And we were just saying, what can we do? And just like you say, we need to do something for ourselves first. You know, we need to take responsibility of ourselves, and then we can ask for change. And I suppose on an emotional level, it gives us a bit of ownership over what we want. And
exactly. I think that's the probably critical point, that if you continue to blame other people for the situation, then you're disempowering yourself effectively. Whereas if you're saying, right, well, you know, I wasn't so whatever, whoever is doing such and such, but you know, I'm also contributing to the problem. I'm using a phone which was manufactured in China or whatever, you know.
Yeah,
or,
I mean,
or I'm using a plastic, you know, whatever it is, you know. And so I'm contributing to the problem, but that empowers me then to do something about it. While you're blaming, you know, Putin or whoever, you're actually disempowering yourself. I know being an activist, you are taking positive action as well. And you are kind of maybe pointing blame at something that you're being activists against. But as well as that, I think you must take on board your own responsibilities.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for some people to even call themselves an activist. I talked once about how when I was first named an activist, I think the Sunday Times was doing an interview about slow fashion and with me and talking about some of the work I'd been doing, which is very nice. And so there was a nice photograph with it, Gerry, the whole lot was so, you know, and then it said activist. And I genuinely panicked because I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to be so much pressure, and I'm not perfect, and I don't have all the tools to answer all the questions by any means, and I don't do things right. But actually, it made me sit down with the fact that if I feel like that, and I can be, depending on the subject matter, quite articulate about it, then a lot of people must be afraid to own that, you know. It's a quiet little thing, and if we were able to empower them as in the public, the world, to be proud of any changes they do make, instead of feeling like they haven't achieved enough, then maybe we're onto something.
Yeah, well, that comes to kind of raising their capabilities, I suppose. That's something which my partner has been very involved with.
That's a whole other conversation I can feel coming on.
Yes, yeah.
Because now I really want to know more about that.
The organization called the Human Development Capability Association that she's active in.
Oh wow, what a household! How do you guys negotiate the recycling?
Oh yeah, well we're far from perfect as well.
I mean, it's very hard. The infrastructure isn't really there, is it? A lot of the time, so it's hard to.
That was one thing I didn't agree with Greta, and I didn't want to raise too much, but she talked about things being black or white, you're either sustainable or you're not sustainable. I think maybe this, it's not, you know, some things are like that maybe, but depending on how you look at it. I know that what she's saying, there's no good tinkering around the edges. You have to kind of get in there and do the grip of it. But you know, what is sustainable? How can you be 100% sustainable? Whoever was, you know?
Yeah, especially in a place where you see the word compostable everywhere, particularly in Ireland and in Northern Ireland. And the big question I always have is like, what does that really mean now? And I don't want to, you know, discourage people from making better choices, but not obviously, but I've read a bit more into the compostable concept in Ireland, and maybe the infrastructure isn't there to facilitate it. And it's just, you know, the greenwashing thing is a big deal here. But again, the minute I start talking about a new thing, I start to realize there's 1 minute left. So
is that right? Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Yes. Well, I suppose maybe we just finally try and finish on the positive notes that Peter Brannan has given us. And I think he has given a very positive message at the end, saying that the levers of the earth are in our hands, you know, and we can control that, whether it's, you know, through the individual level or on a global level. I think that's a positive message, and if we do work them properly, then you know, there's great hope.
yeah, well, I mean, that's a good way to end the end of the day, or start the day for some people, depending on when they're listening or watching.
So yes, so listen, are we out of time? We are.
I think we are.
Bang on, yeah. So it's been fantastic
Yeah.
having a chat with you.
You too. I feel
love
like I
these
blabbered
conversations.
on, but who knows? Maybe there's something in there from my contribution, but certainly I learned a lot from you, so that was really awesome.
But I equally learned a lot from you. Yeah, I think it was equally both ways.